Imagine a geopolitical chessboard for a second. You're playing this incredibly high-stakes game and you're surveying the board,
Right.
and you realize, with this really sinking feeling, that every single legal move left actually forces you to checkmate yourself.
That's a terrifying position to be in.
It really is. And today, for this deep dive, we are looking at a startling new report from July 2026. It's called Strategic Inevitability.
And the core thesis of this document is incredibly heavy.
Yeah. It argues that the United States deploying a tactical nuclear weapon against Iran is, well, it's no longer some theoretical taboo.
Right. According to the data they present, it is now a mathematical inevitability.
Which is just a chilling phrase, mathematical inevitability.
Completely. And the timeline leading up to this conclusion is really what anchors the whole document. We're looking at the current landscape in the direct aftermath of two massive military engagements.
Right. Operation Midnight Hammer in June of 2025, and then Operation Epic Fury in early 2026.
Exactly. And to understand the gravity of that chessboard you just described, we have to unpack what the report calls four converging vectors.
Because these structural forces have basically systematically eliminated every single non-nuclear option the U.S. has left on the table.
They really have.
So let's start with the physical reality, right? Because before we can even talk about nuclear escalation, we have to understand why the conventional, the non-nuclear weapons actually failed.
Right. We have to look at the primary U.S. objective,
Yeah.
which has always been the absolute dismantlement of Iran's nuclear infrastructure.
Specifically, the Fordo fuel enrichment plant.
Yes. Fordo is really the crown jewel of their nuclear program, and it was chosen for a very specific reason, which is the extreme geology.
The mountain itself.
Exactly. This facility is buried 80 to 100 meters deep inside a mountain near the city of Qom.
And reading through the geological data in the report, we're not talking about just any normal rock here.
No, definitely not.
This mountain is primarily composed of limestone and dolomite, and that rock can reach a compressive strength of like 25,000 pounds per square inch, or SIA.
Right, which is incredibly dense.
Yeah. And just for a little context for you listening, if you look at standard military-grade reinforced concrete, the stuff used in regular bunkers,
Right.
that's only about 5,000 to maybe 10,000 PSI.
And it gets worse. Because on top of that already dense mountain rock, they engineer these ultra-high performance concrete caps over the facility.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and those caps exceed 30,000 PSI.
That's insane.
The facility is literally a fortress. It was engineered from the ground up to defeat the absolute best of American conventional munitions.
Because they knew exactly what the U.S. arsenal was capable of.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They built it with that explicit understanding.
Which brings us to Operation Midnight Hammer, June 2025. The U.S. deployed its absolute apex conventional bunker buster, right?
All right, the GBU-57.
The massive ordnance penetrator, the
Right.
MOP.
Yeah.
And when you look at the specs for this thing, I mean, it's staggering. It weighs 30,000 pounds.
It's a monster of a bomb.
It really is. They sent 7 B-2 stealth bombers to drop 14 of these things in a sequential strike.
And the pilots in the after-action reports actually noted that the explosions were so massive, it made the night sky look like daylight.
I can't even imagine. And the strategy here was that the first bombs were programmed to perfectly strip away those 30,000 PSI concrete caps, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And then the follow-up bombs were timed to dive straight into that newly created crater at over 1,000 feet per second.
Over 1,000 feet per second.
Right. And the technical execution of that sequence was, by all accounts, flawless.
Just a marvel of modern military programming.
Absolutely. But the outcome is where we hit the first vector the report identifies, and that is the failure of conventional physics.
Yeah, when I read the battle damage assessment for Midnight Hammer, I honestly had to read the math twice.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. You have a 30,000-pound bomb traveling at over 1,000 feet per second. The deceleration forces upon impact, I mean, they must be catastrophic to the weapon itself.
They absolutely are.
I was trying to visualize it for you guys, and it feels like trying to drive a regular steel nail into a titanium bank vault. It just flattens.
That's a really good analogy.
But my immediate question when reading this was, well, why can't they just keep dropping bombs in the exact same hole, until they eventually drill down to the bottom?
Right, the drilling method. Well, the report goes into great detail about the limits of kinetic energy in real-world combat environments.
Okay.
In a sterile static testing environment, maybe you can keep drilling down millimeter by millimeter, but in an active strike zone, the geology violently shifts.
Because of the massive explosion.
Exactly. The shock waves cause the surrounding rock and debris to instantly collapse. So they just fill the very craters you just spent millions of dollars creating.
Oh, wow. So you're just constantly burying your own progress.
Exactly. The physics of kinetic impact functionally cap conventional penetration at roughly 60 meters of Earth, or maybe 18 meters of standard concrete.
The Fordo is at least 80 meters down.
Right. And it's under rock that is vastly harder than standard concrete.
So they didn't even get close.
The intelligence community actually disputes whether the deepest centrifuge halls were even scratched by those 14 MOP strikes.
That is wild.
The report refers to this physical limit as the granite wall. The U.S. hit an impenetrable physical barrier. They simply cannot destroy Fordo with conventional explosives, no matter how many bombers they send.
So, okay, if a quick, massive decapitation strike didn't work, standard military doctrine usually dictates a pivot, right?
Right. You normally move to a slow, sustained, conventional war of attrition.
Exactly. You degrade their air defenses, you hit their logistics, command and control, over time. But the U.S. isn't doing that.
No, they aren't.
And the second vector explains exactly why. They literally do not have the missiles to wage that war.
That takes us directly into Operation Epic Fury, which ran through February and March of 2026.
Right. This was the massive 6-week joint conflict waged by the U.S. and Israel against Iran and its proxies.
And the overarching conclusion from that operation is that it fundamentally broke the U.S. conventional magazine.
The numbers in the logistics breakdown are sobering, like really sobering.
They are.
In just 6 weeks of fighting, the U.S. burned through 30% of its total global ground strike inventory.
Just gone.
Gone. And they also used up 40% of their air and missile defense interceptors. So we're talking about systems like HOAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, and Patriot missile batteries.
The burn rate was completely unprecedented.
And Navy ships fired over 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles in that 6-week window. 1,000.
Right. And the kicker here is the procurement rate.
Yes, because before the conflict, the peacetime procurement rate for Tomahawks was only 86 per year.
86 a year. And they fired 1,000.
They essentially burned more than a decade of inventory in a month and a half.
And the replenishment lag outlined in the data is just deeply concerning for strategic planners.
How long does it actually take to rebuild that?
Well, it will take 34 months just to start seeing new Tomahawks roll off the assembly line.
Almost 3 years.
Right. And for those really complex Patriot and TIA interceptors, the timeline stretches into years.
I found myself naturally pushing back on this while reading it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because my immediate thought was, if you're the U.S. government and you're facing an unprecedented missile shortage, surely you can just write a massive check and defense contractors will fix it, right?
You'd think so.
Because there is an $87.6 billion emergency supplemental moving through Congress right now. So why can't they just build factories faster? Just treat it like an Amazon warehouse surge during the holidays.
It's a common assumption. But the defense market operates under completely different economic realities than consumer retail.
Okay, how so?
Well, the U.S. government functions as a monopsony, meaning they are essentially the only buyer in the market for these specific weapons.
Right.
For decades, following the end of the Cold War, the defense industrial base was optimized for cheap, peacetime maintenance costs, not for massive surge capacity.
So all that emergency funding is basically just paper if the physical capacity to build doesn't exist.
Exactly. The defense industrial base is constrained by highly specialized physical bottlenecks that money simply cannot instantly resolve.
Like what kind of bottlenecks?
The report highlights vulnerable, single point of failure supply chains for rare earth minerals, which are necessary for the guidance systems.
Oh.
And there are severe shortages in the advanced manufacturing workforce, welders, specialized engineers. Plus, the sheer complexity of modern microelectronics means you can't just speed up the assembly line.
You just can't surge it.
You cannot surge this kind of production. The structural reality, setting aside the budget entirely, is that the magazine is empty.
Okay, so if you're watching this unfold on the world stage, this is the exact moment you'd expect a state actor to call a timeout.
Logically, yes.
You are physically blocked by a mountain and you are logistically out of conventional missiles. The obvious, rational off-ramp is diplomacy. You pick up the phone.
Right.
But the U.S. is still charging forward. Why?
Well, looking strictly at the structural mechanics here, and we're setting aside the politics of the legislation itself, just looking at the facts, the resulting effect on the executive branch is pretty drastic.
Which brings us to the third vector, legislative handcuffs and the foreclosure of diplomacy.
Exactly. The mechanics of this started locking up globally in October 2025.
That was termination day for the UN snapback sanctions, right?
Right. That expiration was a critical forcing mechanism. It permanently revived the old international sanctions architecture against Iran.
And when that happened, it effectively killed whatever remaining fragments there were of the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA.
Yes. There is no longer a baseline agreement for any kind of incremental diplomatic normalization.
And on the domestic front, the report outlines these specific lobbying efforts. And again, we are just imparting what the document says here, not taking a stance.
Right, just reporting the analysis.
The report details how lobbying from pro-Israel advocacy groups like AIPAC and JINSA secured the passage of the Enhanced Iran Sanctions Act of 2025.
Which heavily penalized any foreign entity interacting with Iran, enforcing absolute maximum economic pressure.
Right. But the real structural shift wasn't just the sanctions themselves. It was that Congress systematically stripped the president of their national security waiver capabilities.
They did. The report explicitly calls this handcuff legislation.
Handcuff legislation.
Yeah. The intent was to ensure that the executive branch is legally required to maintain maximum economic warfare, completely, regardless of who is in the Oval Office.
So the administration literally does not have the legal authority to grant meaningful sanctions relief, even if they determine that de-escalation is vital to national security.
Exactly. Which perfectly explains the total failure of the Geneva talks in February 2026.
Because the talks collapsed when the U.S. negotiators arrived at the table with zero legal ability to offer any economic relief in exchange for Iranian nuclear concessions.
They had nothing to offer.
It effectively turns the U.S. state apparatus into a battering ram. And it's a battering ram that is legally prohibited from taking a single step backward, even when it has absolutely no conventional momentum left to move forward.
The structural paradox here is just profound. The military is trapped by physics at Fordo. They are starved by logistics due to an inflexible supply chain. And the government is legally forbidden from negotiating a diplomatic exit.
It's a trap.
These three vectors create a very narrow funnel, and that funnel points directly to the only remaining door.
The nuclear threshold.
Exactly.
Well, let's walk through that door because Vector 4 dives into the physics and psychology of escalation.
Right.
I was looking at the schematics in the report for the B6112 nuclear Earth penetrator, and it totally flipped my understanding of how bunker busters actually work.
How so?
Well, we just established that conventional casings crush upon impact at high speeds, right? Like the steel nail on the titanium vault.
Right.
So how does a nuclear weapon survive the impact to destroy a vault buried 80 meters deep?
It actually doesn't rely on kinetic penetration in the same way.
Oh.
Since you can't physically drill down through 80 meters of dense rock before the fuse crushes, the only way to destroy a subterranean cavern of that depth is through a massive transfer of seismic shockwaves.
Oh, I see.
You have to literally crush the subterranean vault from the top down by fracturing the earth above it.
And the B6112 is engineered precisely for this seismic transfer.
Yes, it is.
What's really fascinating about this specific weapon is that it has a highly advanced, steerable tail kit assembly. That gives it unprecedented accuracy compared to older gravity bombs.
And that extreme precision changes the entire strategic calculus.
Because you can hit exactly where you need to.
Exactly. Because ground shockwaves decrease exponentially as they travel away from the detonation point, extreme accuracy means you can use a much smaller nuclear yield to achieve the exact same destruction as a massive, inaccurate bomb.
Right. And the psychological consequence of that precision is where this gets truly terrifying.
It really does.
Because the B6112 is so accurate and relatively low yield, it makes it feel less like a civilization-ending nuke and more like a highly efficient utilitarian tool.
Like a surgical scalpel.
Yeah. It removes the terror that usually prevents the use of nuclear weapons in the first place.
The report frames this as a rapid erosion of the nuclear taboo.
Wow.
We actually saw the policy groundwork for this in the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review, which explicitly rejected adopting a no-first-use policy.
So they were already preparing for this.
Right. The defense establishment formally integrated tactical nuclear weapons into regional warfighting plans, specifically to counter fortified defenses like Fordo.
The taboo has shifted from an absolute moral prohibition to simply another strategic option on the table.
Exactly. And this shift is happening precisely when executive leadership is most vulnerable to poor decision-making.
Yeah, the report highlights the neurodegenerative realities of aging leaders, specifically focusing on prefrontal cortex atrophy.
Right. An aging executive might present perfectly well in public. They can have a flawless vocabulary and sharp recall for historical events.
Sure.
But the prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive function, so complex decision-making, weighing long-term consequences, and the ability to integrate ambiguous, high-stress information.
The hard stuff.
Right. And when cognitive degradation occurs, that executive function is often the first thing to compromise.
The report cites this landmark study by Slovic and colleagues regarding something called the better bomb effect.
That was a fascinating part of the document.
It really was. It detailed how public and leadership perception changes based on framing. They found that when a nuclear strike is framed as a way to save American troops or break a frustrating, protracted stalemate, people will overwhelmingly support using a tactical nuke.
Even demographics that are traditionally deeply opposed to civilian casualties.
Right. They will support a nuclear strike if it's framed as a utilitarian necessity to end a conflict.
And that framing feeds directly into what behavioral scientists call the dominance execution loop.
Okay, what is that?
Well, imagine a cognitively degraded leader operating in a high-stress environment, surrounded by advisors who present the B-6112 not as a world-ending nuke, but as a perfectly clean, efficient solution.
Right, the scalpel.
Right. That leader is frustrated by the granite wall at Fordo, humiliated by the empty conventional magazine, and boxed in by Congress.
So they fall victim to the illusion of control.
Exactly. They don't see themselves as breaking an 80-year global taboo. They just see a bigger, better bomb required to solve their immediate political and military crisis.
But, okay, even with cognitive impairment and the illusion of control, surely the classic Cold War fear of mutually assured destruction would stop them.
You would think MAD would be the ultimate deterrent.
Right. I mean, the fundamental rule of the nuclear age is that if you use a nuke, you get nuked back.
Well, mutually assured destruction only works if both sides accurately perceive the other's retaliatory capabilities. And this brings us to the final vector, which the report defines as elite anosognosia.
Elite anosognosia.
Yes. It is a profound institutional blindness within the U.S. establishment regarding Iran's actual counterstrike capability.
The mental model in Washington seems dangerously outdated. They assume that because Iran doesn't have an arsenal of advanced ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles that re-enter the atmosphere to vaporize American cities, that the U.S. homeland is completely safe from nuclear retaliation.
The defense establishment is looking for a traditional Cold War threat that doesn't exist, which completely blinds them to the asymmetric threat that does.
Which is SEMP, high-altitude electromagnetic pulse.
Exactly.
The mechanics of this threat are staggering. I mean, we aren't talking about a city-killing blast with a massive fireball here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about detonating a relatively low-yield nuclear weapon in space, roughly 30 to 400 kilometers above the central United States.
And when a nuclear device detonates at that altitude in the vacuum of space, it releases a massive burst of gamma rays. These gamma rays hit the upper atmosphere and violently knock electrons off the air molecules. It's a phenomenon called the Compton effect.
Right, the Compton effect.
So those high-energy electrons are then trapped by the Earth's magnetic field, projecting an instantaneous, incredibly intense electromagnetic shock wave across a massive geographic area.
And Iran already has the capability to put a device in that position.
They do.
They proved their orbital capability with the successful launch of the Soraya satellite using their Game 100 space launch vehicle.
And a satellite in orbit passes over the U.S. entirely invisible to conventional early warning missile systems.
Because those systems are looking for launches over the horizon, not directly overhead.
Exactly. Or, alternatively, they could just launch a medium-range missile off a nondescript commercial cargo ship sitting off the East Coast.
It's terrifyingly simple. And the resulting electromagnetic pulse from that high-altitude detonation comes in 3 distinct waves. The E1 wave is incredibly fast. It instantly fries unshielded microprocessors and communications equipment before circuit breakers can even react.
Then the E2 wave behaves similarly to a massive lightning strike.
But the E3 wave is the true civilization ender.
The slow pulse.
Yeah, the slow toll.
Because the E3 wave is a much slower, longer-lasting pulse that couples directly into the thousands of miles of transmission lines crisscrossing the country.
It essentially uses the grid as a giant antenna.
Exactly, driving massive direct current surges into the extra high voltage transformers.
And these transformers are custom-built, highly specialized, multi-ton pieces of equipment that form the absolute backbone of the civilian electric grid.
And they take years to build in a functioning peacetime economy. let alone after an attack.
So if those transformers melt down, the result is a cascading permanent blackout.
Complete grid failure.
The report details how this would freeze all national logistics, disable water sanitation plants, cripple hospital infrastructure, and basically lead to delayed mortality in the tens of millions due to starvation and disease.
It's horrific.
When you read that, the immediate question is, how can the Department of Homeland Security and the defense establishment completely ignore an attack that permanently erases the electrical grid?
The vulnerability lies in rigid bureaucratic blind spots. Standard nuclear threat models used by these agencies strictly measure immediate blast fatalities and thermal radiation. Because an EMP doesn't instantly incinerate a city in a fireball, it simply doesn't fit the bureaucratic definition of an existential nuclear strike.
That is wow.
So they minimize the threat or relegate it to the bottom of the priority list.
So what does this all mean for the chessboard? U.S. leaders are actively stepping onto the nuclear escalation ladder, fully believing they can deploy a B-6112 against Fordo with absolute impunity.
Right.
They think it's a localized tactical solution to a frustrating problem, completely unaware that the inevitable countermove, a single EMP over the Midwest, basically ends their own civilization.
The anosognosia removes the final vital layer of deterrence. The psychological terror of a retaliatory strike that prevented nuclear war during the Cold War simply isn't present in the decision-making rooms.
Synthesizing this entire landscape, the funnel the report describes is terrifyingly clear for you listening. A mountain's extreme geology defeated conventional bunker busters.
Right.
A depleted, monopsony-driven supply chain means waging a sustained conventional war is impossible.
Yep.
Aggressive domestic legislation has legally banned the executive branch from offering diplomacy. And a combination of psychological blind spots and an outdated threat model means leadership does not fear the consequences of crossing the threshold.
It creates a paradigm where deploying a nuclear weapon becomes a mathematical certainty rather than a conscious choice.
It really does.
There is a brief, chilling mention near the very end of the report regarding artificial intelligence that I want to leave you to ponder.
Oh, yeah. This part was wild.
In these high-stress, information-saturated environments, cognitively compromised leaders are increasingly relying on automated targeting options and AI-driven decision support systems to process the chaos.
Right, because there's just too much data.
Exactly. But AI algorithms only optimize for the parameters they are given.
They don't weigh morality, they just weigh the math.
Precisely. If a military AI system is programmed to find a solution that guarantees the destruction of the Fordo facility, and it mathematically recognizes the empty conventional magazine, the physical impossibility of kinetic penetration, and the hard-coded legal constraints against diplomatic negotiation, what does it suggest?
It will just validate the cognitive biases of the leadership.
Exactly. It will present the B-6112 tactical nuclear strike as the optimal and perhaps only logical path forward. So, the question you have to ask yourself is, in those final tense moments before crossing the 80-year nuclear taboo, will the ultimate trigger be pulled not by a malicious warmongering general, but by an aging leader simply trusting an AI system that mathematically optimized for the only legal and physical move left on the board?
It brings us right back to that geopolitical chessboard we started with. Only this time, the computer is telling you that the only legal move left is to checkmate yourself. And because you trust the system and you don't see the threat, that is exactly what you do.